Hi everyone, I'm Tony, your moderator today, and thank you for joining our webinar, What to Look For in an Operator Console for Microsoft Teams, a Buyer's Guide Deep Dive. Today's session is a practical deep dive into what truly matters when selecting an operator console for Microsoft Teams. We'll walk through the latest Buyer's Guide, unpacking essential features, must-ask vendor questions, and red flags to avoid. Before we get started, just a little housekeeping. This session is being recorded and will be shared with all registrants in the coming days. We'll allow time to answer your questions, so feel free to submit questions at any time throughout the webinar via the Questions tab. Joining me as our presenter today is Peter Fadab, Solutions Consultant. Pete has been a globally respected member of the Enghouse technical team for nearly 20 years. Pete has a huge depth of contact center and console experience achieved in a variety of roles in both New Zealand and the UK, working as support engineer, support engineering manager, professional services consultant, and pre-sales consultant. Today, I'm pleased to welcome him to share his insights on Operator Console for Teams. Over to you, Pete.
Thanks, Tony, and good afternoon, everybody. So we're going to have a walkthrough today, things around the operator console. So we've just had a welcome from Tony. We're going to take a look at some operator console requirements and also some considerations that you should have for operators. And I'm also going to give you some key takeaways of what you should be looking for within that environment. And hopefully today we should be able to set the scene around what are key things, who should you go and talk to, and why certain elements might be important within the business. So first we're going to just take a look at what people often say about operators. That operators are often the first point of contact for your customers into your business. Operators require the knowledge and information to transfer your customers to the desired destination as quickly and as efficiently as possible. So that's simple, right? Now, if you've ever worked and been an operator within the environment, you're going to start sort of throwing things into the chat and maybe not calling me the nicest things because it's not often as simple as what we tend to think. And what we're going to do is work through that today and understand what those requirements, what should we be thinking about. So if we look at what's often listed as the core requirements to an operator console, the first sort of key element is always about that ease of transfer. Really, the reception operators, however we want to describe them, they often receive a large volume of calls into the business, and their job is to guide them to the correct department or to the individual that they need to speak to. So getting that customer to the right home within the business. In order to do that, they want the visibility of staff availability. So on traditional sort of PBXs, that would have been sort of someone's on the phone, off the phone. But obviously, in the new modern world of Teams, you have more of what we refer to as presence information. So you can see not only is somebody green and available, logged into their computer, if you like, opposed to being offline and not available, but you could also be busy because you're in a meeting or out of office, for example, around that as well. Visibility of incoming calls and queues. Obviously, their operators might have a large volume coming in. They often need to see who's waiting behind. Is there an emergency call coming in? All of those type of criteria about seeing how many calls are queuing to them, not just the information about the call that they're speaking to as well. This is why when we take a look at the operator console, this is our one for Teams. Obviously, from IT procurement, you're really looking at, okay, it's Teams integrated. It's embedded in Teams. We can see we've got our little icon within here for Teams, for example, and it's nested within inside that window. Now, that sounds great to everybody from within IT. However, some people may prefer to run that outside of Teams, so they could undock the window from within the Teams window to drag it across, or they might choose to run it in a browser. So having a little bit of choice around that interface can be important. When we're looking at things like the Teams integration, we can see that we've got a directory here. And we can see that that information always contains the Teams presence, the sort of red for denoting being busy, or the green for being available, purple obviously being out of office. We can see in the Operate console that you can always see the call queues and what calls are waiting within the system. Normally we change the colors around this to start them off as more of a green and then sort of turn them more red, so it gives a visual indication to operators about how long calls have actually been waiting within the queue. Obviously, we should have access to a directory of contacts and obviously the information around sort of being able to transfer directly. Do I fire and forget? Or do I do a more speak to the person before a hand call over? And whether it's a warm or a cold transfer, people call them that, or a supervised and blind transfer is other terminology that are being used. So we can quickly see from those sort of highlight levels or high line levels of criteria that the console would immediately repeat those requirements. However, things aren't always that simple. So when we consider that ease of use of transfer, what we really need to do is consider what information operators use to find the right transfer destination. Most of the time we're considering Active Directory is going to be the directory that people are working from, whether that's Azure based or on-premise AD. Integrations are always available for all of the latest technologies. However, if we think about that actual directory there, what it really contains is things like first name, last name, contact numbers, department, and location numbers. Is that the most suitable criteria that your operators are actually using to navigate their way through the best member of staff to look for? If we think about how that may have been populated, especially around things like department locations, perhaps job titles as well within the Active Directory source there, that's been for many years populated by everybody within IT. Is that really what the operators will see? For example, you could be putting everybody's accounts, but they might need definition around who's in accounts receivable, who's in accounts payable, for example. It'll make a difference to who they choose there. Also, the Active Directory or Azure AD will be all of your staff contacts. And we're considering that the operators are really receiving the calls and need to transfer them to someone else within the business that's there. And if life was that simple at the operator's desk, that would be great. Operators also hold a lot of other responsibilities. For example, if you have guests visiting the building, they need a taxi called, then obviously numbers like taxi numbers, hotel bookings, catering contacts for getting lunches for meeting rooms, all tend to fall within the operator's remit as well. There might also be other things that are listed within in AD. If we think about that being individual people are listed within AD. However, there might be a number of departments or departmental hunt groups that you may need listed as well. If we were only to pull the contacts, if you like, from the Azure AD and consider that the basis for the directory that's there, we also need to consider these third-party numbers and these departmental numbers and things that won't live in AD. So what you're looking for from a console is really to have a basis of a directory, but also have a manual directory that can be searched at the same time so that you'll have access and the operators will have access to third-party numbers as well as non-AD type contacts that they might need to see as well within there. When we're considering sort of those transfers as well, when looking around the visibility of staff, the Teams Presence APIs do support that sort of busy and available statuses that are within there as well. But one of the things that you may have from Teams that you don't have from your current deployed PBX will be the ability to get to out of office messaging as well. So this might be a benefit to the operators. So all we're used to seeing if we send an email to someone that's out of the office, we get that out of office response that says, "Hey, when I'm back." Obviously, if you think about it, I could call into a business if the person that I want to speak to is unavailable or out of office, if they're away on holiday. When are they going to be back? What's the operator had to provide as far as information? So if we look a little bit closer at the actual interface that's there, there is a little bit more niche information that operators might find more reasonable. So if we have a look at our contact here, yes, we know from the red dot we're immediately busy. But we can also see that anything from their out of office or their static Teams messages could also be pulled through as well. So I can see that this person's at the dentist till 4, so I can give the guidance, would they like to leave a voicemail, call back later? It gives me that power to be more informative to any callers that are actually there. We can also see that we've got different things coming up from status messages that within there. So, people may not be just putting in their out of office information. You might have some status information. We can see here John is saying, ping me on Teams even if I look busy. Perhaps he just makes himself look busy to stop non-urgent things coming through, but we'll allow people to come through. So he may sit busy a lot for other reasons. So it enables that information to be surfaced through to the console using the Teams APIs that are there. But again, is that information enough from the operators? If we think about how this person is being searched for, we might consider that we're searching using the contact fields here and then searching first name, last name. And we're going to look for John by just using John Peters here. However, when we're pulling in from AD, we're normally pulling in things like departmental information, job titles, and obviously office locations there. I might look for somebody within, perhaps the Sydney office here, or within the sales team, or with a particular job role, which is all good as long as your AD has used all the same terminology. Normally, these things have been put in over years, so you might find some of those languages may change. So I might have people as sales, for example, within there, but you may have people in there as lead generation or other terminology that might have been used as it's changed. Having this as more of a static would be more key and important to them. But even so, if we think about the information we're pulling through from AD, the operators might need to feed the system with a little bit extra as well. This is where we come into perhaps the area of adding additional notes to those contacts. So these are the things that we don't want to push back and write back into AD. But because we're pulling that directory down into the platform, what we might want to be doing is being able to add notes. They're only visible to the operators within the business. They won't be found within AD at all. But we're just going to add some supplementary information here. And that can be quite key to the operators because we can see here we're getting a description of what team they work in, what they specialize in, but also, where to transfer if that person's unavailable, who's the best second contact to utilize within that environment. But these different criteria and notes can be completely adopted by the operators to fill up exactly what they're doing. And there'll be some different use cases, and I'll come back to that as we walk through the information today. Also, around the side, we've got obviously our calls queuing here. We've also got some information about the call that we're talking to, and that's being presented up here with all of the obvious options to hold or to park a call or to end a call within there. But we can also see which queue that came into as well. So things like VIP queue, customer queue number, it could be a regional office number within there. So giving them the visibility if they're handling multiple lines for them to understand what was the point of entry into the system can be quite key as well. We've also got the ability here to add another set of notes here. So rather than these notes which are against the internal employees that are there or the contacts that I hold, I can actually add notes into the actual call that's here. In doing this, there might be certain scenarios where that's being used. If I'm in a more of a fire and forget, where I just try and transfer things off and they can recall back to me in certain scenarios, or perhaps I put calls on a park and then they could recall back. If the operator that was originally handling the call doesn't get that call and it goes to a second operator that's there, you don't really want to have that operator to go through the who are you, who do you need to talk to conversation again. So within some environments where those type of scenarios come up, the operators will often use sort of a caller notes. We're only really living for as long as this call is within the system there. They're not permanent notes, they're just for this call and the life of this call. They like to tack some notes on there about why they called and who they might want to speak to. So if they are parked up because they're waiting for somebody or being parked against somebody, if they do come back into the operator for rehandling, they don't have to go through that same process again. These little things that get the efficiency there, and it's the little things that the operators are used to enjoying that we want to make sure that they're carrying forward into any new solution. One of the things that we look at with the operators as well is about their flexibility. We all assume great calls can be queued to an operator there, but it's sometimes quite key in different scenarios about how we deliver those calls through to those operators. So we're going to run through a couple of different scenarios for that. It may just open your eyes to sometimes things aren't as simple as you think now. If we look at an office, we've got two operator positions here, probably a main reception door with coming into the building and then something going off into the office and possibly a sofa that's there. you think about human nature, if we walk through the door that's there, rather than walking over to the right, most people would probably walk to the left within this environment. So this operator is going to do a lot of what we would call the walk-in traffic that's there. So if we set the system up to just share those calls between the operators using something like longest waiting, for example, for delivery, what we might find is this person is being targeted, but they're also getting disturbed as well. So while they're actually trying to deal with that walk-through traffic that's there, we may not want to ring them. So we typically might have different ways of people answering or presenting the calls to the operator. In this type of scenario, we'd always configure a system to present the calls to both operators, and then the fastest finger first would actually get that call. So operators could pick and choose, they'd both be notified there's a call available, and therefore they would take that. It's very, very common within those sort of walk-through environment receptions if you're in a small to medium business, for example. It's there. Some other considerations that you're also looking for operators, especially in the smaller environments, you may just have a single operator position that's there. So now, second point here, we need to start thinking about, okay, what happens at lunchtime? Very rarely would the main reception be left unmanned. There'd always be someone to meet and greet within there. So typically there might be people from the back office that come out and cover. So if your system is going to be sort of named licenses there, do you need to procure licenses for this person as well as maybe 4 or 5 other people in the back office that are coming in to do that reception cover? Really, what you're looking for in that environment is something that uses a concurrent licensing system where somebody else can come in and sit down, log in as themselves because you want IT security as well. You don't want them using this person's Windows logon. You ideally want someone to log off and then somebody else to log in and still be able to use the application. But you don't want to pay any extra for that. Obviously, if you've got sort of a deployment of software, it's tied to a physical machine. Even in an environment where somebody in the back office may just open up the operator console from there and someone else comes to sit in the reception, you may split those roles there. If you're tying it to a physical machine, then that again is going to cause those problems around there. So even in the more simple environments of a single reception, just start to think about what is being covered as far as sort of, when that person's unavailable, what happens when they're sick or if they need to go out for lunch, for example. We then can get into some more complex environments, which are more sort of enterprise grade. And this is where you'll have a multitude of operators, half a dozen and above probably. And typically what you might find in that environment is you may have a couple of people doing front of house for the walk-ins to the businesses. You may have people in the back office or in this day and age working from home, for example, answering those calls. It doesn't necessarily have to be in that office location that's there. But again, this comes down to the complexity around your call flows that what you want to do. Because we've got a dedicated call answering team within here, what we want to do is work from that sort of who's been off the phone the longest and share those calls amongst this team here. But obviously, with this front of house team there, that may not be the right thing to include them within the group. So we need to think about how those overflows are going to work. Do these people just work on request a call if they can help and support and the back team's busy? Um, do they actually have the ability to have an overflow here? Perhaps if the call's been waiting here for 30 seconds, it then starts to include these people into that delivery decision as well. Also, when we're into more of an enterprise environment that's there, what we also need to consider as well is the amount of information that they have. Obviously, you have a lot more users within in the business, but you also have a lot more attrition of staff, if, as you will, to a small business. A lot more people coming and going, leaving from the business that's there. So one of the things that you tend to get in this sort of environment is the lever process from IT, if you're going to use an Azure directory, becomes quite key as well. For example, I phone into the business, I haven't called in for a year, I ask for Bob Smith. Bob Smith no longer works there. If the operator searches for Bob Smith, if it's been taken from the directory and out of your AD environment, then it's not going to be available within that search list. You can do things like disable the accounts and allow the operators to still see disabled account information. But more commonly, there would be a process where they might put people that were quite key people into the manual directory or the hybrid directory we were talking about earlier. so that they could put in perhaps what the date of leaving was, so they know, once that gets to a couple of years old, they might remove that from the directory, but also who was the replacement or who should they try instead. So when you get more people that are being managed by these operators within the back office, you're up to sort of, the 1,000 plus, couple of thousand people, and zeroing right the way up into 15,000s could be managed by a team of operators like this. So you're going to get that attrition that's there, and that information when people are calling in to these people around that person no longer works here, who should I try next? That's where that hybrid directory term comes in. And this is a lot of the time where operators will not generally just accept the ability to just live and die by the Azure directory. They will need something that sits beside it because they will have a lot of different use cases like staff attrition, like extra sort of third party information they want to put in that's going to live outside that directory. So again, that's quite key to them, and it's something that's quite often overlooked. We all assume getting that internal directory is going to be the easiest thing. So really from today's session, what we're looking into as well is, can teams change the way that the operators work? Well, we've already discussed that they're going to get a little bit more presence-rich information that's there with the sort of the busies, the out of offices that are there. We've already discussed that they could be carrying over the out of office information, so they get that extra layer of detail around there as well. If we think of the way that businesses have worked for many, many years, certainly over the span that I've been working within these environments, you would typically have had a main number for different regional offices. And what we'd be looking at is the the dependencies that Sydney may have had its own traditional PBX platform in it, Melbourne had a different one, and Auckland had a different one. There may not have been the ability to transfer between these locations. Therefore, there was often dedicated staff to answer, a couple of operators in Sydney, if you like, a couple in Melbourne, each to answer those dedicated lines. So one of the things that you need to probably think about with your teams is that you will go on to a tenancy. That's probably at least going to be a tenancy for your region, if not a global tenancy that you're going to go on to. And therefore, there's no longer any difference between these sort of PBXs, if you like, that are here because you're now all part of the same cloud. So it does open up a few more options to you and how you may consider how the operators have been teamed together in the past. We can take a look at that just in a simple way of just saying what we could be doing is to make a sort of an APAC region reception team that's here. Everybody is using the same technology, has access to the same directories and the same information. There isn't really a reason that we couldn't bring in the Sydney main number, and rather than just hunt the Sydney team, we can then also sort of just get it to hunt across anybody. Can all of these people access the same directory, the same information? Yes, they can. There may be some reasons why you might still target, certain operators first. If the call comes down the Sydney route, maybe we're going to target these people first. But we could overflow to these teams. That might be something you can't do within your current environment. Therefore, just consider when you're moving from sort of more of a traditional structured different offices, if you don't have the ability to interop between the different sites today, that's something that's going to change for you in the world of Teams. Therefore, try to focus on what operators do today and meet those requirements, but also this might give you some additional cover as far as to lunchtime cover, sick leave, for example, especially if we have a single operator in all these locations. Do we need six people to come out the back office in Sydney to sort of, share that coverage for the Sydney sort of lunch break when we could quite easily overflow that straight into Melbourne or make the operator available in Melbourne to take those Sydney calls as well. So this also could solve some of those problems and niches that you've got within that environment. So within today, what are our key takeaways? My best advice is to include the operators into the procurement process to get the actual requirements. We all often sort of see that the IT teams that are looking at this, that they do simplify what those requirements can be, and there can be quite a lot of niche requirements that can be overlooked, but they're quite key to the operators. When you're considering your directory requirements, the search criteria that each of those operators are using, don't make the assumption that everybody just looks on first name, last name. Actually sit down with them and find out how they use that directory. quite a lot of times there may be other information. You may need to perhaps run a couple of scripts over your AD environment just to update so things are named the same. So it's best to look at what information they use. Is that found in the AD directory? If it's not, and there is a big disjoint between those two sort of scenarios, the operator still can use a manual directory or an alternative source. Perhaps it's a HR platform, something like perhaps Bamboo and those types of things that we could draw information from. It doesn't have to be AD, but that's everyone's first thought these days. If you're considering AD, just check the health and usability, as I was saying before, around what's that data input like? What's is it up to date? Everyone tells me it always is until we do an import and then we find out that it's not. So it's always worth, having a look at what's in there, perhaps sitting down with a couple of the operators, pulling up some of those contact cards and having a look at what that information is and how it's listed within AD as well. And perhaps look at, repopulating some of those fields if you're not already using things like job titles, departments, for example, within those environments. Also, making sure you sit down with the operators to understand those working practices around lunch, emergency cover, or anything outside the normal day and night modes. It's very simple to say calls come to reception during the day, but at night time, we're going to go to a closed type messages. Those are the very simple basics. Make sure that you capture anything about sort of what happens in the fire drill or what happens around that lunchtime cover as well. Understanding those can be quite key. And then that might expand with the user groups and people that you're actually talking to about lunch for training purposes and those as well. That's our sort of last slide that we had. Consider your locations and your geo numbers there and how they work. Do you have the opportunities to consolidate resources so that you're providing existing cover? Does that solve some of these more complex sort of scenarios that you might have around lunch cover within the system there? The most sort of pertinent thing to say is that the operator console is the first point of contact into your business. It's where most of the calls are coming through to get navigated through. If you do get these requirements wrong, it will quickly escalate within the business. The operators are often not shy about escalating through to more senior people in the business. They speak to them quite a lot. If they're not happy, they do share it. But also, if your customers, regular customers coming in, aren't getting the same experience as what you've provided previously, if you have put any detriment to the ability for operators to find the right people and you end up transferring them around a lot because people aren't getting to the right location, that gets reported quite quickly back into the business. So again, just from today's takeaways, just making sure that you understand directories are key, talking to those operators to understand some of those edge scenarios of what they use, and thinking about sort of how you sort of blend it in with your team's environment to be not on disparate sort of office systems, but as one tenancy there are the key things to see. So hopefully that gives you a quick run through on what is the key things to look for. We'll just pop over to Tony now and just see if we've had any questions coming through while I've been talking, Tony.
No questions, Pete. Very comprehensive presentation. So I think you've covered the main points. Thanks today for presenting, and thanks everyone for joining. I hope you took away lots of key points to help you in your buyer's journey. Um, as promised in the invite, we will be releasing a digital version of the Operator Console for Teams Buyer's Guide in the coming weeks. So keep a lookout for that as registrants. You'll automatically be emailed a copy. Thank you everyone for today. We hope to see you again soon, and we'll be sharing a copy of this recording and the webinar resources that you see on the screen now. Thanks everyone.
Thanks all.